it's more important than ever to keep an eye on retirement.
Hi, and welcome into Eye on Retirement, the weekly show that keeps you in the know about all things retirement. I'm your host, Jonathon McCoy, and today we're talking about why beneficiaries are so important. That's exactly why we've got our team gathered here today, our team of professionals for this episode, which include Taylor Bevan from Market Tax Services, Gerald Eidelman, founder of Eidelman Law Firm, and Kim Sixkiller, who is our life and long-term care advisor with Market Advisor Group. Welcome in, everyone. So today, I've got a story of some folks that we met with recently in our offices, Gary and Carla, and what to do and how to avoid certain issues that may come up when receiving an estate. So when we're talking about inheritances, estate planning, tax management, and so on and so forth, I want to build a little bit of foundation of this story because I was actually the advisor that met with these folks the first time. So they had actually come to us after seeing an episode of Eye on Retirement. So this is what we welcome everyone to do, right? Give us a call, set up an appointment. If some of these questions and concerns are pertinent to your situation, we're always happy to meet. So in this circumstance, we're going to talk a bit with Gerald in our first segment today about estate planning concerns around Gary and the fact that he is now receiving an inheritance from his uncle who had no beneficiaries listed on his retirement accounts. Gary was simply listed as the sole beneficiary in his uncle's will, which took care of certain parts of the estate, but when they discovered late in the probate process that there were no beneficiaries listed on Gary's uncle's 401k and his retirement accounts, that opened up a whole can of worms that really needed to be addressed by a wide variety of professionals. We're going to talk throughout today's episode on how these different team members became involved in this, just understanding the situation part of the process, but then also what to look at going forward and how these things are going to be impacting Gary and his family and his wife Carla and their daughter, who's now 23 years old, that they take care of as she's disabled. So Gerald, talk to me a little bit about where do we go from here, right? They've found out that the uncle had a 401k that did not have a beneficiary listed, although Gary was listed as the beneficiary in the will. There's a lot to sort of unwind in this kind of situation.
Right. In a situation where there's no beneficiary, then the only way, it has to go either, if there's a spouse or child, would go to them, but if there isn't, it has to go through probate to transfer that asset. Now, that has several components of it that may create greater issues. Passing it through the estate, which is doing it through probate, will and likely cost more tax money because the money will be paid out to the estate. Mm-hmm. The state is subject to higher income taxes than individuals. And so there's going to be a loss of money in that way. There's also the fact that depending on the circumstances, in this case, we didn't have the problem, but we could have had the problem, whereas the time for distribution of 401k was shortened from the normal 10-year inherited IRA time frame to a 5-year time frame, again, which would cause more taxability or upfront taxability because you'd be taking the money out in larger amounts.
Okay.
So that's part of the procedure. We were lucky in this case because Gary's uncle had actually had a will, and the will provided that Gary was the sole heir of everything he owned. Now, if we had not had a will, then that would have been greater problems because then we would have to look to see what level of kinship Gary was. If there were other people in closer kinship than Gary, that money would not have gone to Gary, but would have gone to another relative. So we're saved here by the fact that Gary's uncle had a will and designated Gary as the primary beneficiary.
So there's this whole process that Gary has to go through as the sole beneficiary in the will before he can even begin working with this 401k plan that had no beneficiary list.
That's right. That's right. I mean, first, you got to present it to court. You have to ask the judge to allow distributions, and this takes a period of time. It could, depending on the court and how busy they are, it could take 6 months, it could take 1 year to get things going. So there's a time period where he would have no access to that money. Now, given the situation, we were lucky enough that Gary's uncle had left other monies to him. So he was not desperate. But if he had only left the 401k, then he would have been sitting out trying to get that money out for probate for 6 months to a year.
Right.
So that's something to consider in a process like that. That's why, it's so important to have named beneficiaries in your retirement accounts or insurance policies.
So this is a lot of what we talk about in terms of getting ahead of the game from an estate planning standpoint, because it's not just a matter of making sure that you're taking care of your spouse or that your beneficiaries are taken care of. It's just especially significant assets like this uncle's 401k in this case. And the uncle, very unique individual, come to find out after the fact in terms of how he thought about his personal finances, which is why a lot of these things were just on the sidelines and really never anything that he had thought about in his life. But when we're talking to our viewers out there about being proactive from an estate planning standpoint, it's not just about necessarily what you own and who you want to receive those assets if something happens to you, but also in the interim, circumstances like with Gary and Carla, they've got an adult disabled daughter as well, and that has been a big part of their life in terms of how to care for her. We're going to talk a lot in our final segment today with Kim about how long-term care planning and some other things can be put into place ahead of time as a result of this inheritance once everything is actually finally settled. But tell us a little bit about things maybe to consider from a special needs standpoint when we talk about estate planning.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that Gary has to consider is now he is facing a very large amount, a very large fortune, several $1 million that is going to go into basically his estate. And he has to consider that that money, if not properly apportioned, would go to his children, including his disabled daughter. And that money, if the disabled daughter received it, would lose access to Medicaid programs, would lose access to other community programs, because she would have too much money. And then everything she would do from then on would have to be to spend down that money in taking care of her when the government was providing similar programs or better programs than you could do privately. I know typically when we do that, when we have a situation where we know we have a disabled individual and we know that we might want to set aside a portion of the estate to go to something called a special needs trust. Okay. Special needs trust is specifically designed for disabled people. The intent is to allow them to have access to the gift from their parents or whomever, not directly, but indirectly.
To be able to provide for things like health care, general needs, keeping a roof over their head, things like that?
Well, it doesn't cover rent or food, but it does keep, clothing, vacation, companionship, clothes, a computer, a TV. I mean, there's all kinds of things.
And these are things that as primary caretakers of their daughter, if something happens to Gary and his wife, Carla, the question is, what position does it leave her in? What sort of instructions, could be put in place ahead of time? I think that's the root of what we're getting to here is the fact that advanced planning oftentimes is not something that simply a financial advisor can handle, or even a tax professional, or someone who's very well experienced even in the insurance world. It's not all just about one of those specific areas. And we talk so often about this team approach to retirement planning. If you feel like your retirement is missing something, sometimes all it takes to find out is just a 15-minute phone call. To set up that introductory phone call, just reach out at 833-624-REPORT. That's 833-624-7376, or check out our website at retirementhelp.com. There you can also watch past episodes or submit a question to us to possibly answer on one of our future episodes. When we come back, we'll be continuing this conversation on Gary and Carla with our tax advisor, Taylor, about the tax implications they're looking at in terms of the inheritance of this uncle's 401k that once again didn't have beneficiaries listed, and what to do, how much might it cost them. Hi, and welcome back into Eye on Retirement. In the last segment, we were just discussing Gary and Carla. Gary's uncle in this situation had left him a 401k, but did not actually have Gary listed as a beneficiary on that 401k itself, which meant that Gary had to wait for a probate process. We talked a lot about that with Gerald, our estate planning attorney. There's also a lot of tax implications, right, Taylor?
Yeah. So unfortunately, with no beneficiary listed, we had to go and seek clarification from Gerald and the estate planning team so that Gary would know what he would need to ask the custodian regarding how the income in the inherited 401k would be taxed. Understanding the tax implications on those 401k accounts can be tricky. So as you guys pointed out earlier, there's very much a difference when the 401k is paid to an estate versus an individual. So that can throw a wrench in people's tax returns more often than not. So after, we consulted with Gerald, we then went to our tax team to, help them so that they wouldn't have any surprises, come April when they had to file their taxes and stuff like that.
Yeah, and the first step in this was, the challenge of just, gaining access to the money, making sure that the custodian for the 401k would even talk to Gary in the first place, which is part of where we had to start with the probate process. But, from a tax perspective, after this is all settled, and they're understanding whether the custodian's going to be paying the money to the estate, which is going to have much more significant tax impact, or able to pay it out to Gary himself, which is going to allow him a few more management strategies maybe. Can Gary then just turn around and put that money back in his own retirement? How does that work? What happens with that money long term?
That would be nice if, that was an easy, straightforward, I'll just reinvest it back into my own IRA. But unfortunately, the laws don't allow for that. So he has to draw that account down within 10 years if it's paid out to him, and then just kind of deal with the tax consequences each year of however much he ends up taking out to get it depleted in time.
Right, or even taking a lump sum.
Yeah. Right. So, understanding how each of those are going to impact his tax return rather than just blindly hoping for the best is what we're here for. And those are kind of the two big takeaways is one, don't be like Gary's uncle and not list any beneficiaries on your retirement accounts, any type of retirement account, 401k or whatever. But two, the importance of working with a team of financial professionals that can address the taxes, the estate management, the financial planning side, all under one roof together so that you can streamline those unfortunate kind of...
Yeah, it's an unexpected situation, right? They hadn't planned on the uncle passing away. They also were not even prepared for the fact that the uncle decided to leave Gary as the sole beneficiary of their entire estate. That was a surprise in the first place. So a lot of these facts of the situation didn't really start to unfold until after it was too late.
Right? They were already set in stone.
And so that putting families in a position where they're much more prepared, or beneficiaries know what to expect in terms of what happens if something happens to mom and dad, or what happens if something happens to an uncle, but even spouses in a lot of cases. We don't want to get too in depth with the time that we have today, but there's a big difference in the impact from a tax perspective on a spouse inheriting a retirement fund from another spouse versus a non-spousal beneficiary, right?
Yeah, so there is a little bit of kind of, I guess you could call it relief for a surviving spouse who inherited that account. They are not subject to the 10-year drawdown, so they can actually inherit that account and leave it and not have to worry about making sure that it is emptied within the 10-year timeline.
This is a lot to weed through for someone who's dealing with a situation like this unexpectedly, and typically the loss of a loved one, whether it be a family member, your spouse, a child, or anyone else that you might be having to help manage the distribution of an estate or planning for the distribution of the estate. When we get into our next segment, we're going to talk a lot with Kim Sixkiller, our life and long-term care advisor, about the the impacts of not just how to manage this money and how it might potentially benefit the disabled daughter in this circumstance, but ultimately the fact that all of this stuff can get so complex. Income can affect your Medicare costs, your taxes can affect your estate planning. There's this push and pull of all of these different ingredients that can siphon money off of your nest egg over the long run. And if you don't have a team working together, Market Advisor Group is that team. To set up a 15-minute phone call, just dial 833-624-REPORT. That's 833-624-7376. Or check out our website at retirementhelp.com. You could set up the call there or watch past episodes where we highlight stories exactly like Gary's. And we look to plan for your retirement even when it's not going as planned. If things are seeming a little bit off track, now might be the time to give us a shout as well. And in our next segment of Eye on Retirement, we do turn to Gary, Carla, and their healthcare needs, as well as some of the conversation around these long-term care concerns that they may have regarding what this money from the uncle might do for them. We'll see you after the break. Hi, and welcome back into Eye on Retirement. Let's turn back to Gary and Carla's story here. After helping them sort through their estate, the tax ramifications, management of how that money is going to be distributed to Gary as the beneficiary of his uncle's estate and potentially usher him into an earlier than otherwise expected, we want to turn to the concern around their daughter's circumstance in this story. And for that, we want to turn to Kim Sixkiller, who's in our Life and Long-Term Care Division. Kim, we come across a wide variety of family circumstances. We've talked a bit about Gary and Carla's circumstance and their adult daughter who's special needs, and that doesn't just have impacts on what Gary and Carla need to be thinking about from an estate planning standpoint in terms of the entities or trusts or whatever may need to go in place, but also the financial management of what could potentially benefit the daughter, or using some of these financial assets to help provide for her care or even their own personal care over the long run. So tell us a little more about what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jonathan, you're right. This is one of those cases that truly show that life is so intertwined, right? It's not just about one situation. And in this, the biggest emotional the stress for them was their adult daughter's care. And so there was an opportunity that came from all of this. They always say something good comes out of everything in life, right? This gave the opportunity for Gary to be able to retire earlier than he might have been able to. And what that did was, frankly, gave them an opportunity in their retirement planning to segment out and look at it and say, okay, we can afford independent health care for ourselves. So our market Medicare advisory team was able to kind of look at that for them. But then how do we look at our adult daughter who luckily has a longer life expectancy than adults with disabilities used to have, and say, how do we make sure that if something happens to us unexpectedly or as we age, she outlives us, she's taken care of? So one of the fallacies that people have is they think someone's disabled so that long-term care insurance is just off the table. And that's just not true. There are long-term care policies out there that as long as you can complete your 6 activities of daily living, and those are the bathing, dressing, eating, continence, toileting, and transferring. If you can complete those 6 things on your own, there are still policies that you can qualify for.
Right. So just what you're saying there is, even if somebody out there is on, say, Social Security disability insurance or receiving some sort of disability payout, they may not be made ineligible for things like long-term care coverage if they're looking for that type of insurance or financial backing to help cover those costs, right?
Absolutely. And what's key in that is you need a team such as ours that has access to your CPAs and your estate planning attorneys to say, okay, if we're going to do this, how do we place this in a way that those funds, as Gerald mentioned, do not kick us out of our Medicaid eligibility, right? So if we're going to take funds and create accounts in our adult child's name, how do we do that in a way that legally it's protected, right? And then that's where Gerald and team come in, and the tax team, and we get
creative.
Yes, creative is a good way to put it, to make sure they have what they need, because ultimately we wanted their adult daughter to be able to stay in a situation where she can be at home for as long as possible, getting that care that she needs. And then when a need for a more substantial care came along, there is access to the best care available.
Yeah. So think about the transition of their lifestyle over the next 10, 20, 30 years. It's not just Gary and Carla retiring and being able to spend more time taking care of their daughter, but what about as their lifestyle slows down, or as they get into what we call the slow-go years of retirement, and maybe Gary and Carla are starting to need a little bit more care for themselves? And not only does that impact downstream the care needs for their daughter, but for Gary and Carla as well, which is a lot of what you and I talk about on a regular basis in these consultations, is for people that are in a more straightforward, I'm retiring from work, I just want to go live a happy life, but what if this long-term care concern becomes the biggest financial risk to our assets, our portfolio, our life savings, and our lifestyle?
Absolutely. Some of the interesting parts of that are there's over $600 billion annually of caregiving that is happening free of charge, if you will, because families are taking care of family members and there's things going on. And then the statistic that caregivers are 4 times more likely to need caregiving services themselves as they age. Gary and Carla are absolutely in that. So Gary being able to retire and take on some of that emotional and strain of their daughter does not mean that they won't have it on their own later. So we were able to sit down, as you said, as we do with people so often, and say, let's plan for the unplannable. Let's remove that emotional burden with that financial ability and make sure that everybody has the best opportunity to live their life as fully as possible. Yeah,
and I use the analogy a lot of, we think in the weather world, whenever there's something like a severe thunderstorm warning or a tornado warning, where we've got to know, A, which direction the risk is coming from, right, to be able to know where to move to protect ourselves. In this case, our consultation process is built around identifying those risks. Where are they coming from? The tax impacts, the lack thereof estate planning, in terms of a lot of folks we meet with just have never had those in-depth enough conversations. And then over the very long run, the long-term care concerns around how can my portfolio absorb, the costs of whether myself or my wife needs nursing home care or even just in-home assistance. The family situation is going to dictate a lot of those decisions that you make. And it can feel so isolating when your retirement doesn't seem to be coming together, or some of these unexpected changes in your life and inheritance, tax impacts, things that you just didn't see coming hit you. And you don't have to do it alone. It can help to have a whole team working together for your retirement plans. If you'd like to set up a 15-minute introductory phone call with Market Advisory Group to see if we could be that team for you, please reach out right now at 833-624-REPORT. That's 833-624-7376. And don't forget to check us out on YouTube. We upload all of our episodes there for you to watch on demand. Just go to YouTube and search Eye on Retirement. That's all the time we have for this episode. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Jonathon McCoy, along with the entire panel, reminding you that we're keeping an eye on retirement.
Unless otherwise indicated, all client and prospect names mentioned on this show have been changed to protect the identities of the individuals discussed. Investment advisory services are offered through Foundations Investment Advisors LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. The content provided is intended for informational and educational purposes only. The views, statements, and opinions expressed herein are those of the individual speakers and not necessarily those of Foundations and its affiliates. The information contained herein does not constitute an offer to sell any securities or represent an express or implied opinion or endorsement of any specific investment opportunity, offering, or issuer. Any discussion of performance or returns are not indicative of future results. Each individual investor situation is different, and any ideas provided may not be appropriate for your particular circumstances. Foundations only transacts business in the states where it is registered or excluded or exempt from registration requirements. Registration as an investment advisor is not an endorsement of the firm by security regulators and does not mean the advisor has achieved a specific level of skill or ability. No legal or tax advice is provided. Always consult with a tax professional. Legal services are offered by Eidelman Law Firm. Tax services offered by Market Tax Services. Market Advisory Group does not provide legal or tax advice. Any comments regarding safe and secure investments and guaranteed income streams refer only to fixed insurance products. They do not in any way refer to investment advisory products. Rates and guarantees provided by insurance products and annuities are subject to the financial strength of the issuing insurance company, not guaranteed by any bank or the FDIC. The guest commentators featured in this show are not investment advisor representatives of Foundations and do not provide advisory services. Market Advisory Group does have several investment advisor representatives that can provide such services. This is not endorsed or affiliated with any U.S. government agency, the Social Security Administration, or associated with any federal Medicare program. We do not offer every plan available in your area. Any information we provide is limited to those plans we do offer in your area. Please contact Medicare.gov or 1-800-MEDICARE to get information on all of your options. A Roth conversion may not be suitable for your situation. The primary goal in converting retirement assets into a Roth IRA is to reduce the future tax liability on the distributions you take in retirement or on the distributions of your beneficiaries. The information provided is to help you determine whether or not a Roth IRA conversion may be appropriate for your particular circumstances. Please review your retirement savings, tax, and legacy planning strategies with your legal/tax advisor to be sure a Roth IRA conversion fits into your planning strategies. All rights reserved.